Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Ireland, and today I'm going to be presenting evidence for the continuity of consciousness after bodily death, a topic that's of interest to most all of us. So my purpose here is just to share with you some of the compelling evidence that supports what's called the survival hypothesis. That's the survival of consciousness. And here are the main areas that we'll cover. Some of these briefly, some at greater depth. First, which most everyone's heard of, are near-death experiences. Second, evidential mediumship, which is my primary area of interest and background. I'll be spending the most time on that. And then I'll lightly touch on shared death experiences, ADCs, which means after-death communications, deathbed visions and terminal lucidity, and reincarnation. So you may be asking, well, how am I qualified to talk about these things? So this is my key area of interest, especially mediumship, that being. I have actually tested and certified mediums for almost 10 years. I've also conducted my own experiments and been involved in experiments conducted by the University of Arizona and University of Virginia pertaining to mediumship research. I currently collaborate with qualified researchers, including Tricia Robertson of the Scottish Society of Psychical Research, and in fact, doing an experiment with her right now, which I'll hopefully have a follow-up visit with you to talk about after we have our results. And what really drew me into this was my father, Richard Ireland, was a renowned 20th century psychic medium. So I grew up with that phenomena, saw it in my day-to-day life. I really didn't take the same path as my father. I took a more mainstream path, but the catalyst for my brain re-entering this field was the unexpected passing of my youngest son when he was 18 years old. And since that time, which has been about 20 years, I've really taken a deep dive into this and actually written 2 different books on this: Soul Shift, Finding Where the Dead Go, and my newest release, The Persistence of the Soul, both of which deal with this topic. So let's first talk about near-death experiences. This is a well-known area for most folks today. It's in the news, the media, there's articles written about it all the time. It provides some of the most compelling evidence that's out there for the continuity of consciousness after bodily death. And so what we're talking about here are cases where someone is medically deemed dead, or typically through cardiac arrest. Ceased brain activity are the primary criteria for people who are then revived and later report information that can be verified as correct. It challenges the model of consciousness that claims that the brain generates consciousness. Some of the prominent researchers in this field, if you go back, Dr. Raymond Moody coined the term NDE in 1975 in his breakout book, Life After Life. Dr. Pim van Lommel is a prominent researcher out of the Netherlands. I've actually been able to interview him for my organization that I co-founded, Helping Parents Heal. He had a landmark article published in the Lancet Medical Journal, which was a big deal, highly respected journal. Dr. Jeffrey Long's another one. He's collected a database of more than 5,000 NDE cases, and from that, categorized different types of experiences people have during these, and the overlap of them. And it's really interesting. Dr. Bruce Grayson's worked at the University of Virginia for quite a while in the Division of Perceptual Studies. He's done extensive research in this area, and he's authored a book called After, which I think is one of the most highly regarded books pertaining to NDEs now. Dr. Penny Sartori is in Wales. She's done a lot of cutting edge research involving comparing people who had an actual NDE and an out-of-body experience versus those who had cardiac arrest and didn't, to compare the results of people who actually could report their experiences versus a control group, which is those who did not have an out-of-body experience and had to kind of guess at what happened to them. And the results were rather striking, showing that there's a marked difference between the two groups. Sam Parnia, he has also conducted a more recent research involving 570 different patients. And there are other researchers as well, but these are some of the prominent names in the field. I thought I would just touch on a couple cases that I find particularly compelling. The first one involves a woman named Pam Reynolds, who went into the Barrows Neurological Center in Phoenix, Arizona, my hometown. She had an aneurysm in her brain, a large one. It was considered too risky to treat through normal surgical procedures. So the doctors employed a unique process to her before conducting surgery, and that was to cool her body down to about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, remove all the blood from her body and brain. Uh, so there was no breathing, no blood going to the brain, no circulation of any kind during that period of time, which was roughly, I believe, an hour. During that time, she had what's, a very elaborate near-death experience. She was dead according to all normal criteria. She initially reported hovering over the operating table. She later had the typical tunnel experience, meeting deceased loved ones on the other side. And after she was revived, she recounted these things, including a number of things that could be verified, one of which was an instrument she reported and described what it looked like and how it functioned. Also noted that the surgeons initially tried to cut into the veins in her legs, beginning with the right leg, but found those were too small. So they had to close up the incision and then switch to the other leg. So this was all accurate information. As I mentioned, she went through the tunnel experience, saw a light at the other end, met several deceased relatives, and had what is typically termed a blissful near-death experience. This data here comes from Dr. Bruce Grayson. Now, case number 2 deals with something. So some of the skeptics have claimed, well, we don't know when those experiences happened. So is it possible they happened after blood flow was reinstated, or these kinds of things? So that's why I like to bring up this case. Anita Morani was a cancer patient who was in a deep coma. And while her body was in this comatose state, she had an out-of-body experience. Traveled down a corridor in the hospital about, I think it was 40 feet, overhearing a conversation that took place between her husband and the doctor at the time, essentially where the doctor was reporting that she had very little time left to live and a bunch of other details. And she actually had this kind of miraculous recovery and reported these details, which all were proven accurate. So the fact that this conversation occurred far away from her body validates that she truly perceived this in some other manner than through her 5 physical senses while laying there in an operating room. Some of the other phenomena that I'll just touch on lightly are the shared death experience. Now, this is a newer type of phenomena. It's probably existed for quite a while, but it's only been reported on more recently and documented in books. Dr. Raymond Moody actually had a recent book on this. And this is where a person who is not dying is with someone who is, and they jointly experience the process of the person's passing. One of the examples I like to give is a man named Jeff Olson, who, while driving with his family in a vehicle, had a crash, and the occupants of the vehicle were he and his wife and 2 children. During this, he was knocked unconscious. He had an out-of-body experience. He elevated up above the crash scene, and he was accompanied by his wife and one of the 2 children. And the wife basically conveyed to him that he needed to go back for the other child. Well, later on, when they were rushed to the hospital and everything, it turned out that the 2 people who had died were the 2 he saw in the out-of-body experience, and the child who survived he had not seen in the out-of-body experience. So that's just an example of a shared death experience. ADCs are direct contact with a discarnate spirit or some other direct experience in a waking state, or it could be in a lucid dream. I've had one myself in a lucid dream state with my son. Ironically, it was a case where I saw my son in a reality that was more I guess it would more real than waking state reality. I would describe it as he was sitting in a room that was completely white, but it only had three walls, three white walls, and the fourth wall where it should have been was just an empty space. It looked like it went into infinity. It was like the rest of the universe. And I always felt it was real, but ironically, a woman wrote to me just in the last couple months, and she was reading my first book in that account, and her jaw dropped when she got to, I think it was page 189, because she had apparently had the exact same experience with this three-walled white room, and the fourth wall was infinity. She had always doubted her experience until she read my account and found out we both had the same exact experience, which was pretty cool. Maybe one that's equally or even more compelling was my wife, while sitting at the foot of our bed, after we had just come back from a cruise, felt the presence of our son Brandon and saw him as a shadow figure out of her peripheral vision. The very next day, we got a call from a friend. He, not knowing of her experience, reported an identical one, saying he was in his recording studio doing a song. And while he was sitting there, he felt the presence of another. He saw a shadow figure out of his peripheral vision. He saw flashes of white light and other things. And then he actually verbalized, saying, "Hey, Brandon, what do you want?" And at that point, he was guided to redo the lyrics of a song he's working on and redo a bass track or bass line, which he actually was using our son's bass guitar at the time, as Brandon was a bass player. So that was rather ironic to see those two cases back to back with him having no knowledge of my wife's experience the day before. Deathbed visions is another one. This is where a person who's near death starts talking to deceased loved ones. And what's most compelling about that is often some of these cases include people not known to have died. So those loved ones around the person on their deathbed see and experience this person discussing things with those folks who have passed. Then, days later, a week later, it's discovered that one of the people that he connected with or talked to had indeed died, but none of the people in the room knew it at the time. And then reincarnation, there's a number of different types of research that have been done on this. You have the hypnotic regression, but I think the most respected means of that type of research goes back to Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia, who would interview children, because young children, typically these children that have memories of prior lives tend to forget them after age 7, approximately. So he would go to these various areas in South America, Africa, and meet with people, tribes who had a child who claimed to have a prior life with maybe a different tribe far away, giving details about names and who they were married to, who their uncle was, what they did, what their hobbies were, maybe all these different things, or even how they died. And then would go to these different places to look into that and talk to the people and find out, oh yeah, lo and behold, that person by that name did live here, and they were married to so-and-so, and they were killed this way. And ironically found in some of these cases, the children would have a scar on their body that correlated to the cause of death in the prior life, whether that be, say, a stabbing or something like that. Now I'm going to dive into mediumship because, again, that is my primary area of expertise. And so we're going to spend more time there. So part of my goal here is to really help people understand the evidence that exists for evidential mediumship. And when I talk about evidential mediumship, I'm not talking about someone just telling you that your grandmother's here and she loves you very much, but rather people who can provide detailed information, specific information that's pertinent and meaningful to a sitter. And a sitter is the recipient of a reading. That's the person on the other end who maybe is mourning the passing of a loved one and wants to have a form of connection. In this process, I'm going to teach you how, if you're interested in receiving a reading, how you might go about it, what your expectations should be, how you can do a good job and have hopefully the best possible outcome, how to capture the information that's given, and then how to determine the quality of a reading. So what I'm sharing here are some of the different organizations that more recently have done research in this area, because really it goes back to I mean, some of the earliest, not there's even earlier than this, but some of the earliest goes back to 1882 with the founding of the Society of Psychical Research in London, which was actually established by some of the most notable and most respected scientists in the world back in its day. And there are a number of documented cases through their journal over the years, validating these phenomena that are supportive of them, and in hand with the ASPR, the American Society of Psychical Research, which worked in conjunction with the SPR quite a bit. And the ASPR was founded by William James, a famous psychologist, psychiatrist back in that era. So currently, though, I'd say Windbridge Research Center is one of the most productive and most engaged organizations of this type that looks into these phenomena. And Dr. Julie Beischel is the director. And her summation of the research she's done, and anyone can go there to the website, and there's all kinds of papers, and their work has appeared in a variety of journals. You can read about it. But essentially, she's come to the conclusion that qualified mediums are able to report accurate, specific information about deceased people tied to a living sitter without any advanced knowledge about either party and no sensory feedback. Tricia Robertson, who was the president of the Scottish Society of Psychical Research and is still in the organization, she did some phenomenal work with Professor Archie Roy, who was an astrophysicist in the UK and one of the most highly decorated scientists of his era. He's since passed, but the work that they did involved a number of mediums under multiple blinded conditions. And she said the results were very encouraging, in fact, millions to one against chance. Their article was published in the Journal of the Society of Psychical Research. And I was involved with a study with Dr. Emily Williams Kelly at the University of Virginia. I don't know if those results have been published in a journal or not. If people want to Google it or go to the UVA Division of Perceptual Studies site, they can see what papers are available. But at the time, she told me the results were embarrassingly good. So what's the whole thing behind mediumship? Why is it important? And it kind of goes back to the core thing we talked about in the whole reason that I'm here today is to talk about evidence that life goes on. Consciousness persists after physical death. So, but in the meantime, we have people that live on here on the earth in a physical body, like me and my wife, who suffer the passing of a loved one. So, there's these readings, evidential readings can provide a therapeutic benefit. And Windbridge, as I'd mentioned before, has done research and study on that to really show that a quality reading, in addition to therapy, can have a far better effect than therapy alone. Next, people in grief do need credible resources, mediums that have been vetted, and I've done that through my certification process, but there's other ones that are high quality that aren't on my list as well. It's just more about referrals. The idea that someone who's either fraudulent or deceiving themselves, thinking they're better than they are, can actually do more harm than good. And some mediums have tremendous abilities. I've seen that, phenomenal. And others may have questionable motives or just, again, are simply deluded about the level of their ability. So I think it's really about separating the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. What does a good reading look like? Well, it's going to be accurate. First off, most of the statements are going to be able to be validated as correct, and they make sense. They're going to be detailed. It's going to provide information such as names, occupations, and hobbies, not generalities. They'll be pertinent to the sitter, correlating something that's meaningful to them from the person who passed. So they'll recognize, hey, this is something that maybe only the two of us would know, or something they would know that is meaningful to me. And what I would say are big hits. Those are, at least a handful of highly significant statements are made that really take that reading from being good to great. So people may wonder, well, what is mediumship? Well, I guess it's a case where there's no way of proving exactly how it works, but it's assumed to be the mind-to-mind transfer or telepathy between a discarnate person and a living person. Mediums typically receive this information through these primary ways or methods: clairvoyance, which is clear seeing, not necessarily through the eyes, although some have described it that way, but more often through the mind's eye; clairaudience, which is hearing. It may not necessarily be an auditory way of hearing, although in some cases I've heard that that can happen, and that does happen, but more often like a thought dropping in. You're hearing in your mind. Clairsentience, that may be like just sensing. That could be a case where the medium actually feels like the cause of death, whether that be a heart attack or something like a pain in the chest or a difficulty breathing or something like that. Or it could, clairsentience also extends to smelling something like, oh, I smell tobacco, I smell pipe smoke. And lo and behold, maybe the deceased person smoked a pipe. And telepathy, really the thought transfer, that's kind of thought as the primary method by which this information comes through. We do know that telepathy can occur between living people. Duke University conducted a number of sessions over many, many years with people testing telepathy, putting them in different buildings, having them go through a deck of Zener cards. It's a deck of 25 cards with 5 different symbols. And where one person would look at a card, try and telepathically send it to someone in another building, and then you'd have a recipient in the other building that would try and write down what they thought it was, and then record that. And the results there were far beyond chance. And also, some information received by mediums can be precognitive. Skeptical arguments. Mediums provide statements so general that they could be applied to almost anyone. I've seen cases of that in my testing with people who have tried to get through the protocols and not been successful because it's just, that's the case. But that's not applicable to the good mediums. Sitters can make things fit because they want to believe. They would say seemingly successful mediumship readings are the product of fraud. Mediums could employ cold reading, which is reading body cues and responding and asking questions to direct the conversation in a specific way. They could say mediums could use the internet and social media to conduct research in advance of the readings. Here's how I test mediums. And the reason I'm doing this is really as a public service to vet them for people. So I conduct 5 blind readings. The medium doesn't know the identity of who they're going to be reading for, and they can't see them. So they're conducted by Zoom with the video off and the last name's hidden. All they get is a first name, and they're only given that name at the time the reading begins. The reading is then recorded and transcribed. The sitter, who's a recipient, grades the reading for accuracy. So they're the only one that knows whether the information is correct or not. And they're going to grade each statement as either correct, incorrect, or indeterminable. And then the sitter can decide if bonus points are due for certain statements that are phenomenal, like say if they got the person's name or their exact favorite food or something along those lines. So my key takeaways through this process of doing these is that the really good people are exceptional at this. The top 5 scoring mediums that I had averaged 87% accuracy in test readings. Now, I talked about correct, incorrect, and indeterminable. I set the indeterminable on the side. Those could be like a precognitive thing that hasn't happened yet, like a prediction, or maybe a piece of information the sitter can't find an answer to. Maybe it pertains to somebody in another country that they don't know, so they're unable to find out if it's correct or incorrect. But at the same time, I only allow 33% maximum indeterminables. If they exceed that, then we count the anything over that as incorrect. But again, the top 5 in my studies averaged 87% accuracy. If I look at all the mediums who passed, they averaged over 74% accuracy with the same criteria. Those top 5 scored average 4.6 bonus statements per session. So almost 5 per session were like phenomenal hits, something really big. And then if you look at the entire group, the average is 2.6 of those bonus statements per reading. Other takeaways, even the best mediums have off days. So while I would do 5 tests to get an average, an overall result, because even some of the best ones, they would have maybe 3 great readings, 1 good one, and 1 not so good. It just happens. They are human beings, and this is a process that works through them, and their physical health, their well-being, their mental condition at the time of it has an impact on that. Mediums can't always dictate who is going to come through. It may be that the sitter wants to connect with a specific person, but someone else comes through or other people come through. So that you have to manage your expectations. Validations sometimes are confirmed long after the conclusion of a reading. Sometimes that's due to psychic amnesia, which is basically where you say something to someone and they don't recognize it. A case comes to mind where I saw a medium one time delivering a message to a woman in a gallery reading, talking about something about medicine or a medical environment, and that the person, who was coming through was trying to signal them, and the person was just like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. And then finally the medium says, well, what do you do for a living? And she says, I'm a doctor. So sometimes people receiving this, it's coming so fast that they kind of blank out, or they have in their mind already what they expect to hear or want to hear. And when it varies from that, they suddenly just have this amnesia kind of effect. And drop-in personalities. This is kind of interesting. This is, I think, one of the best forms of evidence. And that's where you get information about someone but it's not you, it's for somebody else. An example of this is when I was at work one day, this is maybe 10, 12 years ago, and a friend in another city in Sacramento was reaching out, trying to contact me because their brother had just died in a motorcycle accident. I didn't have time to talk to her at the time, so I had to send her a note and just say, I'll connect with you later on. So really all I knew is that she had this brother pass, I think it was that day. Ironically, later that afternoon, I had an appointment scheduled with a medium friend, not for a reading, but for something else we were going to talk about. So on my drive to the medium's home, I contacted the friend, and she said, yes, she was very distraught. Her brother had just died. He was in a motorcycle accident and killed instantly. That's all I knew. That's all she told me. So I got to the medium's house. The medium's Deborah Martin, by the way. I said, hey, it's ironic I'm here with you today because I have a friend whose brother just died today. And she said, well, it's no accident you're here because I need to talk to her. I said, well, do you want me to call her now? And Deborah said, no, let's you and I do what we came here to do, and then we'll see what we can do. So we finished our talk, and then I said, well, do you want to try and contact her now? She says, I would, but I have to go pick up my daughter. So why don't you and I just sit down and see what I can get? So we both sat down. She took a pad of paper. She goes, okay. And I only told her that that a friend's brother had died, not how. The first thing she said to me was, well, this involved the motorcycle. He died instantly, and he wants her to know that he didn't suffer. And then he says something about the little kids, and then something about bath time. Then there's something else about a red ribbon or whatever. And I think it was like a banner or a red ribbon, and it went over his casket. So I didn't know any of those things, whether they were correct or meaningful at all. Then on my drive home, and there were many more of them, but I don't want to belabor the point here. I then was driving home. I called my friend Linda back and said, hey, Linda, Deborah, this medium, she got that your brother died in a motorcycle accident, and I didn't tell her. And that she said he died instantly and he didn't suffer. He wanted you to know that. Then he went on to share a bunch of other things that I didn't know and I can't validate. And then I explained about the little kids, and she said, oh my goodness, when my brother was going through a tough time in his life, my husband and I took them in and took care of them, and we actually called them literally the little kids. And she said bath time was a big deal. That was their favorite activity. They would put toy boats in the water and have water wars. And then she said, oh yeah, and his motorcycle buddies bought this red ribbon and it went over the casket at his funeral service. So this went on. So that would, the importance of that is really not just that she was accurate, but that those are things I didn't know. So you could not allege telepathy with me because I didn't know any of those things. And this, there's another, going back to the archives of the Society of Psychical Research, there's something called the cross-correspondence experiments that are considered the best evidence of all time for evidential mediumship. And that happened after one of the founding members died. And then a short time later, these messages started coming through in fragments to different mediums located around the globe. Individually, the messages were meaningless, but then when assembled together, they formed a mosaic and a comprehensive picture of a meaningful message that demonstrated some intelligence behind them. So how do these mediums get the information that they share? First off, most of them are meditators. They're able to use meditation to still interfering thoughts and get out of their way, out of their conscious mind. They have to take a detached perspective as an observer, so they're not emotionally tied into or overanalyzing information. I've had some of these things come to me, and I know a little bit what it feels like. I'm not any kind of practicing medium or psychic, but I have some sense for what it's like. And it's often very subtle information. So today, if we're blasted by loud music, television shows, movies, smartphones, social media, all that stuff, you have to get away from that and quiet your mind to be able to perceive this subtle information. A lot of them start through dreams and journaling. They'll maybe have a precognitive dream, or in a dream they'll get information that's pertaining to an upcoming session. They'll often journal things before the reading even starts and have that information ready by the time they sit down with the sitter. And they don't let fear, performance anxiety affect them. They have to set their ego on the side, realize it's not them. They're just a messenger of the information. So what's the average medium look like? Well, not this. These are some prominent people in the field from left to right: Alison Dubois, John Holland, Suzanne Giesemann, and Maureen Hancock. What are they like? Mediums are typically highly empathetic people. They feel very deeply. Most of them are female. There's some males and most of the males are highly sensitive. Oftentimes they've experienced some sort of trauma or NDE in their life. So it's interesting. It's like oftentimes this traumatic event or NDE will catapult them into this. Some people, like my father, were just born with it and lived their whole life with it, and it just got stronger. There's also a creative, artistic connection to these abilities as well. So my father used to talk about that too, and that, the artistic and creative link to the psychic, and the psychic and medium are like hand and glove. Also, sometimes they're very sensitive and feel drained around large, noisy crowds. So if someone wants to get a reading, here are ways to do that and have it be as effective and enjoyable as possible. So first, you need a credible medium. As I've said, I've put these people through a number of tests. I've certified 41 people over almost 10 years. If anyone wants to find them, my website's markirelandauthor.com, Mark with a K, Ireland like the country, author, markirelandauthor.com. There you'll find links to my certified medium site. Also, for anyone who's a bereaved parent, or if you know a bereaved parent and they want to look into helping parents heal, there's a link to that there. I also have other articles and videos and things that could be helpful to folks on that site. So select a credible medium is number one. That's the most important thing. Folks, I think being skeptical is good, as long as you're open-minded. So if you're real skeptical and you're afraid, if I book this, someone's going to research me, then have someone else book it for you, and then gift it to you, and then you'll call in, they'll expect the other person. But what I would say is that people I've vetted, you don't need to worry about that, because they've already gone through the 5 blinded readings and they had to perform at a high level to pass. I always make a mental request in a prayerful way before a session. So I'm asking my loved ones to be there and be present. Come to it with a friendly and positive attitude. So mediums tend to feel that energy that's coming off of you. So if you're real quiet and kind of negative or sour, you're probably setting yourself up for a poor reading. So just being friendly and positive is a good thing. But you don't want to feed the medium. You can confirm accurate statements like, yes, that's correct, or yes, I understand that, but don't really elaborate. Don't feed them a lot of information. They have to earn it on their own. Once it's over, you can share the key validations, kind of recap the reading, because they appreciate that feedback and to know how they did and if they're doing a good job. And that's it. I just would like to thank you for your time today, and I will again, if anyone wants to contact me, go to my website, markirelandauthor.com. I have a contact page there. You can reach me through that, and I'll be happy to respond to you, answer any questions you may have. And I'd just like to thank you all for being here and having me on today.